Okay, today's going to be today will be a very deep share. So I believe it will be understandable, but I'll be presenting a very powerful chiddush in this share that I've never really said before, and it tells us a lot about what's really going on that we're not really aware of. Okay. So you listen very carefully and to try and understand it. You should be able to understand it, but there's a slight possibility that it'll be a little difficult. But it'll take care of itself and so on. The concept that I want to speak about today is the concept of existence, which of course is a very fundamental concept, and so forth. Now. Just to repeat, I have to go over again some critical concepts about existence to make sure that everybody's aware of it. What exactly exists? Well, the universe, the whole universe that we see, stars, planets, galaxies, the planet Earth, all entities, plant life, animal life, human life, every and the different objects that we have, home objects, objects in business, transportation objects. I mean, the universe is filled with objects. Okay, the word for the object in ontology is an entity. The universe is filled with millions of entities. And all these entities fundamentally exist. And what does it mean that they exist? Let's analyze the structure of existence and really see what's going on. What does it mean that an entity exists? Okay? First of all these entities that we see in the universe are separate. They're independent of each other. One person has little to do with another person. The existence of one person is basically independent of another person. The existence of one star in the universe is separate and independent of the existence of the star, also in the universe, and planets. Everything exists, but every entity is independent of every other entity. It is separate from every other entity, as indicated by the space between us. The space between us tells us that each entity is an individual entity, and that's what it is. So this is the way we see the universe. But if we think about the whole universe and every entity in it, we think of two basic concepts that form the event called existence. The first is that every entity has a definition. It's the answer to the question, what is this entity? What is this thing? So the answer to the question reveals the definition of the entity. And fundamentally, we try and look it up in a dictionary, which gives us the definition of what each entity. It tells us what an entity is, and so on. But and that definition has a certain technical name called the essence. ESSENCE. The essence of every entity is its definition. It tells us exactly what its characteristics are that define it, that make it to be, and so on. So when I have an entity called a human being, his definition of a human being basically is a rational animal or a sentient being that has the senses, but who also thinks. And that's the definition of a human, and that definition of a human is different than the definition of an animal, which is a sentient being, and a plant, which is not a sentient being. But fundamentally, each entity has a certain definition. But the fact that an entity has a definition, does that mean that the entity must exist? No. You can conceive of an entity with a definition, yes, with an essence, that doesn't actually exist. For example, in the 16th century, there was no such thing as a tape recorder. There was no such entity called a tape recorder. But you can conceive of an entity even though it doesn't exist. And what is a tape recorder? It's some kind of a device. It's a device which permits one to capture the sound that is being made, and then you're able to record that sound later on. So that's the entity of a tape recorder in a certain sense. Now, in the 16th century, there were no tape recorders, but we do have the essence. We can conceive of such a device without it existing, you see. So the first thing that you want to know in every entity, and the most fundamental thing, is the definition of that entity. For example, in the Torah, we have many different entities. We have an entity called Shabbos. That's right, Shabbos is an entity. And if I ask you to define Shabbos, could you give me a definition? That's right. You tell me this and you tell me that about Shabbos. But no, I want to know the features of Shabbos that tell you exactly what it is and how it's different than everything else. So the essence of every entity is that it tells you two things: what it is and how it's different from everything else. That's how you form a definition, okay? And if I want to know what Shabbos is, and I ask you for a definition of Shabbos, what would you say? You'd have a hard time giving me a definition, but Shabbos is fundamentally a specific time. That's what it is. It refers to a specific time that during that time, there's a certain hashkafa, a certain energy that descends from the spiritual universe, the spiritual world, to the physical world, and demands the what? It demands the cessation of certain specific physical activities. That's it. That's Shabbos. So what is it? It's a time. It's a certain time that takes place. And it's a certain time that something happens. There's a certain spiritual essence. There's a certain spiritual energy that descends from the universe, from the spiritual universe to the physical universe. But in order to be a recipient of this energy, and by the way, this energy is the energy of Olam Haba, the future world, you have to cease doing certain specific categories of constructive activity. And that's what Shabbos is. So if I wanted to define Shabbos, that's how I define it. What is it, and how is it different from something else? So that's one characteristic of an entity, its definition or its essence. The other characteristics of the definition, or not definition, the other characteristic of the entity is we want to know, okay, we have the concept. We understand what it is to its essence, but does it exist? Just because you have a concept doesn't mean that concept exists. So we want to know, does the entity exist? So what determines that? So we have a new concept called existence. What is existence? It's very hard to define existence because we really don't know clearly what it is. We just experience it in a certain sense. So the existence of something really is a process. Existence is some kind of process that an entity participates in. That's right. It's not synonymous with it. It's not identical with the entity, with the essence, but the entity participates in a certain process. And this is a process which we called being. Being. So therefore, we say that every entity which exists has two aspects. It has the definition of what it is, and it has the fact that it participates in a certain process called being. And that's existence. And we notice the relationship between these two definitions. The essence of something is what it is. The being of something is that it is. It exists. But we notice that these two concepts are separate. One does not necessitate the other. The essence of something does not necessitate that the thing exists. You see it. But if the thing exists, then it does necessitate the fact that it has an essence. That's true. But it's not the other way around. But these are two ideas that are added together. And when they're added together, presto, the entity becomes real. We say that the entity is real. So that basically is a certain type of analysis of what existence and what an entity is. And the subject that studies the nature of existence itself with entities is called ontology, from the ONTOLOGY, ontology, and it's a certain branch of philosophy which studies the science of existence. And I've given you some of the principles of what it says. But when you really think about it, no one ever talks about this, but many years ago, I discovered there's another form of existence. That's right. In other words, existence is normally done in a certain way. How is it done? It's done through the process called existence. And when that's attached, when that's added to the essence of a concept, suddenly the entity exists. But actually, what I have found out that there's another way to exist that doesn't involve that process. What? How is that possible? You mean you can exist without existence? Well, in a certain way you can. But the truth is that new process only applies to certain entities. And most of the entities in the world, in all the existence, in all the universe, do not have this. And what is this process? This is the process of self-awareness. That's right. You see, most people think that consciousness, that like when a human being has consciousness, what does he know? What does he feel in consciousness? If you close your eyes, what do you feel? What do you know suddenly that you didn't really focus on before? You know that you exist. So therefore, your own self-awareness is a process which conveys to the self of which you are. You see, you are in essence a self. That's an entity that you possess. What does that really mean? What does that mean, a self? What is a self? Well, we really don't know clearly what it is, you know, but it's some kind of entity that actually exists, and that's what you are. And this is a very important concept. If I go over to a certain person and I say to him, and this example will define what it is. If I go to a certain person, a human being, and I say to him, who are you? Tell me who you are. And I look at him and I see his clothes. I see he's wearing, for example, if he's a male, I see he's wearing pants, he's wearing a shirt, or he's wearing a toga, whatever it is, he's wearing certain clothes. So I look at him and I say, are you your clothes? Is that what represents you? That's what defines you? And then you would say to me, no, I'm not my clothes. Okay, so then I would say, so therefore remove your clothes. So now the person is standing naked and I say to him, well, what I see now is a body. I see you and I see you as a body. And then I say to the person, is that what you are? And you would say to me, in reality, no, that's not what I am. I am not my body. That is something which I am contained in, but it is not me really. Okay, so let's go on to the next step. So I say to you, okay, take off your body. And suddenly you take off your body, if you know, and that's somewhat synonymous with death, but you take off your body and suddenly you're left with something else called a soul. And then I look at you and I see your soul, and I see your soul is conscious. So I say to you, well, wait a minute, is this you? Are you the soul? So you would say to me something shocking, which is really true. You would say to me, no, I'm not a soul. In other words, my body and my soul are really lenses. They give me the ability to know certain things about reality. Physical existence, which I see through the body, tells me the existence of entities, but these entities are all separate. But spiritual existence, when I see through my soul, it tells me that all entities are connected. But that's what I see. But they are really a lens that inform me about the nature of entities. Okay. But then I say to the person, okay, now I see you as a soul. But is that who you are? And you say no. So I say to you, take off your soul. So you jump out of your soul, and what suddenly do you appear? So you say to me, well, I am simply consciousness, pure consciousness itself, without existing in any kind of body, soul, or anything. I am a self, and that's what the self is. The truth is, every human being is really just a self, and that self, when God made it, was contained in a soul, and then later on was put into a body, and then it puts clothes on, and that's who you see. But none of these three items is really what you are. The essence of me, M-E, me, is really a self, pure consciousness. Now, does it have a definition? Not really. No one really knows what pure consciousness. Most people think that consciousness is a property or is a characteristic of a person, but it's not really. They have it wrong. Consciousness is not a property of the person. Consciousness or awareness is the focus of a person. That is the person in essence. Because the self, which is the person's entity, what does it do? What does the self do? It's aware. When you close your eyes, yourself, which is contained inside of you, is suddenly aware of yourself completely alone. And the fact that it's aware of itself, the fact that it's aware of itself, means that it knows that it exists. So existence is a form of self-knowledge. It's the capacity, ability of the self to know that it exists. It's a self-knowledge of existence. And that is different when we say an entity exists itself. When an entity exists as a process, it means it participates in a certain process called existence. And when it participates in that process, it suddenly appears in reality. But there's another way. Those entities which have self-awareness, and what entities are? And those entities are really human beings. Human beings possess something which nothing else has. Please make sure that you're in silence. I'm hearing too much noise. The human being which has the ability of self-knowledge, of the knowledge of me, that self-knowledge comes from the essence of himself, which is the self. That does not come from the process of existence. So therefore we see that a human being is a different type of entity than all other entities in the universe. Even an entity like the sun, which is almost 1 million miles wide and extremely hot. It's 50 million degrees in the heat, parts of it. Even the entity called the sun, which is huge and extremely hot, is an entity, but it has no consciousness. It does not know that it is the sun. It has no awareness at all. It has no awareness of its own existence. So when you look at the sun, it's different than when the sun looks at you, which it can't. You can look at the sun and appreciate it. You can say, you are the sun, you are a star. But the sun has no awareness of itself or any awareness of you. So who is greater, you or the sun? You. Because you have self-knowledge, and that's the most fundamental, that is the greatest capability of all, self-awareness. Because you know that you exist through your self-awareness. So therefore we see that there are two types of entities. There's the entity which exists in a process called existence, and that existence process is added to the essence, so the two concepts come merged together, and that gives the reality of an entity. But there's another type of existence, which you know that you exist, or you exist through what? Through a certain activity of the self, whereby self-awareness, the self, which you are, knows that it is. And that's an incredible gift. And the truth is, there's only one other entity that has the same form of being. That's right. There's one entity that has being similar to a person, but not the same. And who is that? God. God also has self-awareness. How? Well, we don't know. But God has self-awareness. In other words, God knows that he is God. He knows that he exists. But His self-awareness is absolute. There is no difference between God's essence and his self-awareness. They are the same. He himself, when God says me, he is referring to his self-awareness. They are both they are identical to each other. The self-awareness of God is not a process. The self-awareness of God is himself. It's an absolute unity, and this is what it means, Einoi Movadoi. There's nothing outside of God. Because his awareness of himself and himself are both the same thing. We don't have that kind of self-awareness. We have a self-awareness when we know that I have knowledge of myself, but there's also a myself. There's a kind of a duality. So therefore, that kind of entity which knows its existence through self-awareness, both God and you, the human being and so on, is called a subject. A subject. A subject is a kind of entity that does not exist through the normal process. It doesn't exist as an existential manifestation. It exists as an awareness manifestation. And the only thing that exists as an awareness manifestation is a subject. And that subject is only the human being and God. And this possibility that you exist through your awareness is a gift from God. That's what it means when God says, let us create man in our own image. And he's talking to the angels, which exist a little bit like a subject, but not exactly. Because angels exist only through a function. Besides that function, they have no existence. But the human being has a self, even without a function. He has a pure self in himself, and he knows himself. So therefore, this is the greatest being that God ever made. So we see that there are two types of entities. The entity that we normally perceive is an existential entity, which exists through the process of existence. But there's another entity called a subject, which exists through its process of self-awareness. And this is a critical concept. Now, we want to understand, what is self-awareness? Where does the awareness go? Well, let's go back to the person. The person is a self. Can he reach that self? Not really. Nobody could actually know or reach that self. But if I strip every part of that person from himself, his clothes, his body, his soul, suddenly I'm left only with a self. And that's who he is. And we cannot comprehend what a self is until the future world, Olam Haba. Because in Olam Haba, it is not a world of the body, it is not a world of the soul. Olam Haba, the future world which God has intentions to bring, is nothing more than a world composed of selves, of many different selves. Because that's ultimately what a person is. A person, in essence, is pure consciousness. Now, when I talk to a person, I say to him, close your eyes. And he closes his eyes. And I say to him, what are you conscious at this moment? And he says, I'm conscious of me. Now, do I say, are you conscious of something else? And he says, not really, because I can't see anything. Since my eyes are closed, I'm not able to see. So therefore, I really don't have awareness. My awareness of something outside of myself, called other, the word other, something else, is only possible through my five senses, through my sight, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching. And if I don't employ any of this stuff, then all I'm really aware of when I close my eyes, and let's say I exist in a container full of water, and I'm breathing, and I can have no sentient sensory contact with anything else, then all I really know now is me. I know the entity called me, and so on. I don't know any other entity. But if I open myself to all my senses, I know as I open my eyes, suddenly I'm not only aware of me, I'm aware of other, something else. In fact, I'm aware of me as I sense something else. That's really what happens. We are never really aware of the mind itself. We are only aware of the mind as it focuses on something. We are aware of the mind when it focuses on another sight, on a sight. We are aware of the mind when it focuses on a touch or a hearing. We are aware of our minds when we feel things. We are aware of our minds when we have impulses like hunger. You know what I mean? So therefore, we are aware of a mind when it's in some kind of action, but we are not really aware of mind as it exists itself, which is part of self. So then the person says, so when I open my eyes, I suddenly see the world of other. But the question is that really true? And this is what I'm doing. I'm going to examine the true nature of self-awareness. Does self-awareness mean I'm aware, and either I'm aware of myself, which is called me, and I'm aware of something else, and that's called you. So therefore, my awareness gives me the knowledge of me and you. Of me, the self itself, it's a self-knowledge, and you, something outside of myself, it's outside, and therefore it's called an other. And I have awareness which applies to both, and that's how I'm aware of both. But is that really true? No, it's not. This is really a fiction. It's really a shocking fiction. Why? Because how do we refer to as awareness? We refer to awareness as self-awareness. That's really the term. What does that mean, self-awareness? Well, we think that it means I'm aware of myself. And what do I call that awareness? Me. And also, I'm aware of you, the other. But is that true? No, it's not. Because the only ability of awareness is that it can give knowledge only of the self. In other words, awareness is the existence of the self. It tells you when the self, which produces that awareness, knows that it is, it knows the word me. All awareness really does. Awareness is a process. It's some kind of, it's not, it's much more, it's part of yourself. It's the activity of your being that gives you this knowledge of yourself as against anything else which exists. It does that. So therefore, what self-awareness is, it's really a knowledge that you exist. It's the fact that you know that you are. How do I know that I am? Not because I participate in some process which lets me know that, but the fact that I am aware, self-aware. So self-awareness is the process of awareness which tells you that you exist. And therefore, it's a contrasting process to the process of existence. Now, this is very important because what it really says is something incredible, that human beings which possess self-awareness in reality cannot be aware of other. That's right. The awareness itself, which exists through the self, only gives you an awareness of yourself because its awareness is the process of existence or being as it is. So therefore, it only gives you information about your being. It only gives you information about the existence, or I should say the being of you. So therefore, that being called self says me. I am me. I am me. And that's all your awareness says, because your awareness comes from the self. The self participates in this activity of awareness, and that activity of awareness tells the self that it is, that it exists, and that's its essence. Well, can the self participate in the process of awareness, which tells me that something else is, that there's an other, there's something outside of me that also exists? And the answer is no. It doesn't have that ability because it is simply an event, it's an action that comes from the self itself. And it gives the knowledge to the self that it is. Every self can do it. Every self knows that it is. That's called self-knowledge. And its awareness is confined and limited to the self-knowledge of its reality, of its being. Can the awareness that it possesses give you knowledge of something else outside of itself? Not really. Because the awareness is not something which is attached to the self. It's not an activity which the self participates in as something it does. The self does not do awareness. The self is awareness. It's part and parcel of awareness of the self itself. And automatically, when you are a self, you are aware. Because what does the self do? The self does self-awareness. It doesn't do anything else. So the only thing that a self can do is really to know that it is. It knows it is because the awareness that it has comes from self. That's its activity. Its activity is that it always knows that it is, that it exists, that it's real. You see, in the existential manifestation, let's say an entity, which possesses existence as a process, may not possess existence as a process. You can have an essence which has nothing to do with the activity of existence. But if you are involved in the activity of existence, you see, your essence is involved in the activity of existence, then you exist. And that existence of one thing is the same as the existence of another. The existence of every entity in your life is exactly the same. It's always a process of being. It gives reality to the entity itself, to the essence of the entity. So therefore, existence can have every entity participate. Every entity in the universe that exists participates in the process called existence. So existence provides for what's called multiplicity, multiple entities. The reason why you have multiple entities is because you have multiple essences which participates in a single process that's same for them all. And that process is called existence. Right? So therefore you can have multiple existences or multiple essences. And that's every entity of all. But awareness is not like that. Awareness is not a process which is the same for all, because awareness is a form of existence where you know yourself, but you only know yourself. You don't know anything else. You know definitely that you exist, because that gives you the possibility to say me. It's generated from the self. It's an activity of the self. It's not a process that the self participates in. Existence is a process that the essence participates in to become real. But awareness is not that kind of process. Rather, the awareness is simply an activity which is performed by the self, which gives it a key aspect knowledge that you exist. You can say me. So therefore, whereas existence is a process which allows the multiplicity or multiple entities, an infinite number of multiple entities, awareness is not such a process. It only allows the entity of self, but there's only one self. Each self knows that it is independent of anything else. Not only knows itself independently of every other self, it doesn't know any other self but itself, because it emanates from the self its own. Its awareness is simply an activity of it that tells you reality. It tells you being, and it tells you being for that self alone. It cannot convey that information to anything else. So the amazing thing is this question, a very powerful question. How do I know anything else? How do I know, since my awareness only tells me about me, it allows me to say me, how do I know about anything else? How do I know about you? I'm aware of you, but this awareness has nothing to do with self-awareness. And the truth is, there is only self-awareness. There's no other awareness, because it's something which emanates directly from your inner being, yourself. There's no other awareness of anything outside of you. You don't possess the event, the activity at all. So the truth is, how do any of us, how do we detect anything? How do we detect anything besides me? How do I know a you? How do I know a he? How do I know a she? How do I know a they? How do I know this? And that's the real question. That's not an easy question to understand. First, you have to understand the distinction between an existential manifestation, an entity which exists, and an entity which the self, which is aware. Awareness is different than existence. Existence is added to the essence, and awareness is the essence. So awareness only tells you about the reality of the self that has it. So then the question is, so how could the self know anything else but me? And the truth is it cannot, because it emanates from your own self and it applies to your own self alone. So how do I know anything about other? In a certain way, the self of God applies only to himself. But since that awareness is himself, literally, it's synonymous with the me. The self-awareness and the me of God is totally identical, which is not the case by us somewhat. So that's why God is said to have no reality. Einoid Muvada means there's nothing besides him, because there's nothing outside of him, literally. Because he knows that he exists through his awareness. God does not participate in a process called existence. But God has an activity called awareness, which is completely identical, unified with the being of the me of God. So therefore, God has no reality outside of himself. But we do. Because our awareness, even though it comes from self, is not totally identical with the self. How is that? We don't really understand. But we do not have the unity that God has. Since God is his awareness, there's an absolute unity, and that's what we mean by Hashem Echad. There is one God. We don't mean that there's what? That there can be only one, that there's only one God, and there doesn't happen to be another one, but there could be another one. No, we mean that there cannot even be another God. The number one, when we say God is number one, it's not the number one of mathematics. Why? Because the number one allows the number 2, 3, 4. But the number one of God does not allow number 2. That unity is absolute. God is one because he is the only one that has that level of awareness, which is absolutely synonymous with himself. We, however, could be a number 2, but our awareness is only confined to telling me that I exist. It cannot tell me that something else exists. And this is not easy to understand. But that's a question that remains. How do I know anything else? If all I can know and all I can be aware of is me, so then how can I know you? As far as I'm concerned, you doesn't exist. So that's the real question. I'm not saying that there cannot be a you. There can be a you. Yeah, there could be a you. Existentially, there can be a you. And it's possible to have a you where you're aware of yourself. But how can I be aware of you? If self-awareness is confined to myself and tells me that I exist. It doesn't tell me that you exist because I have no idea what that means. So therefore, how can any self know any other self? And the answer is it can't. You cannot know another self. Yeah, but you say to me, but I know other self. I know all my friends. I know all my relatives. You know what I mean? I know my husband, my wife, I know my children, or I know myself, I know my relatives, my mother, my father. I know a lot of other people. Well, how do I know them if my awareness is confined to myself and it gives me self-knowledge of my existence? How do I know all these people? And the answer is, with self-awareness, you cannot know. So then how does the world work? And now, in order to answer this question, I'm going to answer it with a shocking revelation of how I know you. someone outside of me. And to understand this, you have to understand the concept of an organism. That's right. What exactly is an organism? An organism is an entity which is composed of different parts, like the human body. The human body is said not to be an entity alone. It's an organismic entity. It's an organism. What does that mean? It's composed of different organs. The liver, the heart, the brain, the kidneys, different organs. And these organs all work together. That's right. They all work together to keep the person alive. So if entities, and if any of these organs suddenly disappear or are missing, the person dies. Okay, that's an organism. In a certain way, an organism is like a team. It's a team where every member of that team must exist. It's a team which if one person in that team disappears, then the whole team falls apart. That's an organism. And that's the human body. A human body cannot exist without a kidney, with a liver, without a heart, without a brain. Even though each of the organs do something, and sometimes the function that it does is a little more important than another function. For example, the brain is the most important organ in the body, but a brain cannot exist on its own. It needs a heart, it needs a liver, so therefore it cannot exist on its own, even though its function maybe is slightly more important than another function. So an organism is an entity composed of different parts, each where all these parts have a co-function. They all work together towards a common purpose and a common theme. And that if any single organ disappears or is missing, the person cannot live. That's an organism. Now, you know something? What's the fundamental characteristic of an organism? Well, an organism is a very strange being. Why? Because in an organism, there are trillions of cells, units that compose the organism. There are liver cells, there are heart cells, there are brain cells, there are kidney cells. Each of these organs is composed of very small units called a cell. And each one has different cells. But the one thing they all have in common, they all know each other. That's right. Your liver knows, your liver cells, each of them know your heart cells. They do. Even though they will never see each other, because the liver is in the lower part of the body and the heart is in the upper part of the body. So they will never actually see each other. And they will never feel each other, but they know each other. They know, each liver knows that it also has a heart. It also has a brain. That's right. You know, how do I know that's true? How do I know that your liver knows your heart? And therefore, there's no such thing as a stranger in an organism. That's right. An organism does not have the concept of a stranger, where one cell does not know the other. Even though that cell never sees the other, it knows that it's there. How do I know that? Because if suddenly one of these organs fail, let's say, for example, your heart fails. So what do the doctors have to do? Well, what they do is they put in a heart transplant. They take the heart of another person and they put it into you. And suddenly their heart starts working in your body. Well, what happens to your body, or what happens to a person's body when it suddenly gets another heart from another person? I don't know if you know it, but it rejects it. It says, I don't want that heart. Why? It's a heart. You don't have a heart. Your heart's not working anymore. So take what you can get. So your body says, no, I don't want it. Why? Because the only heart that I want is my heart. M-Y, my heart. What do you mean, my heart? A heart is a heart. What's the difference if it's my heart, your heart? So the body says, no, I am an organism. And you understand, as an organism, I am conscious of every other organ in this body. And I know every organ in this body, even though I don't see it, I know that it's mine, M-I-N-E. That's right. So therefore, what your body, when it talks, if it could talk, and would say to you, I want my heart, I want my liver, I want my brain, my kidneys, and so on. Your heart speaks with the possessive pronoun of mine. And if you put in another organ, the same type of organ in that body to replace it, it says, I don't want it. It's not mine. What does that mean? You don't need yours. Yes. The only thing that I will accept in my organismic consciousness is my organ. And therefore, if it's not my organ, I will reject it for the rest of my life. So doctors have to give it a certain immunosuppressant, which attempts to defy rejection. The person has to take that medicine for the rest of his life. Why? Because if they don't counteract this rejection that the body automatically produces towards an organ that was given to him and wasn't his originally, that person will die. So therefore, what doctors have to give is an anti-rejection hormone or medicine that will block, it will cancel this event, this effect of rejection. That's right. So therefore, we see something incredible in an organism. When something is an organism, so that every member of the organism is necessary, or the thing will die. You see it. There is no such thing as a stranger. It will not accept the same organ from someone else. So what does that mean? Well, that means something incredible. That means that every cell, on some way, has a consciousness, not only of itself, me. In other words, your liver not only knows that it is a liver, of course, your liver cells know that it's a liver, but more than that, your liver also has what's called an organismic consciousness. It's consciousness on a much higher scale. It's the consciousness of self, and it's the consciousness, common consciousness. It's the consciousness that it shares with all the other organs in the body that say, you are one organism. One organism. So therefore, every entity, every organ entity in an organism has two different forms of awareness. It has, first of all, the awareness of itself. That's called self-awareness. And there's another level of awareness called organismic awareness. It's another level of awareness of what its relationship is to every other organ in the body. It has a knowledge of itself, and it has a knowledge of every other organ in the body in addition to self, so that every other organ in the body is not a stranger. You see it? And submits to the possessive pronoun my. The reason why your liver says my heart, because it actually senses my heart. When it knows that there's a heart, it knows that that heart belongs to it, not another heart, that heart. So therefore, there's a consciousness in the human body which is beyond self-awareness. The self-awareness is only the knowledge that the cell has of itself. But the cell also possesses another level of awareness. It's called organismic awareness, where it knows that you belong to me. And this level of awareness is shared by every organ in the organism. Every organ in that body participates in that level of awareness. So we see that there are two levels of awareness, self-awareness and other awareness, but only other awareness when it comes to something which is an implicit part of the organism. It doesn't exist between two entities that are separated. Two separate, independent entities, if they have an awareness, they have an awareness of themselves, but they have no awareness of other. If they're completely disconnected from something else, but they have consciousness, they do not have consciousness of anything else outside of themselves, because all they have is self-awareness, the awareness of self. But if you are an organism, you have two levels of awareness. You have awareness not only of yourself, you have an awareness called common awareness, organismic awareness of everything which is part of your body. And that's true of any organism. An organism always has a dual level. It has a dual level of awareness, itself and every other member of the organism. That's right. If it didn't have that, it would never know the other organ. You see, that's the thing. You only know that you exist in your awareness, but the only thing you know that exists is me, the self. You don't know anything else outside of self, unless you are an organism. If you are an organism, then there exists another level of consciousness, which is outside, which is a consciousness of others, but others only as they are included in the organism itself. Therefore, the organism has no concept of a stranger. Every organism has an intimate knowledge of the other pieces, the other organs the other members in that organism. So what do you see from this? You see something astonishing. Astonishing. You see that the human race, which is composed of billions of people, all of them being a self, and all of them being self-aware. All humans are self-aware, and all humans know, coming from self, that they are. But they do not know the existence of another person at all. But yes, they do. Why? Because they know your existence outside of the self. Why? Because you are really an organism. You are part of an organism that they also includes them. That's right. In other words, we don't really realize this because God has hidden this. God has hidden not your self-awareness that you know you are, but He has hidden your organismic awareness. So therefore, when you can look at another person, you know you're seeing someone else. But how are you seeing him? Are you seeing it with your self-awareness, the thing that tells you that you exist? No. You're seeing that other person outside of you through your organismic awareness. That's right. But it does not let you really know. It somehow hides the fact that he is part of your organism. Wow. So this is what God has done. God has, therefore, your ability to see another person comes not from your self-awareness. It comes from your other awareness. It comes from your organismic awareness. You can only know something else outside of you, only if that something else outside of you is really together with you as an organism. Otherwise, there is no way to know that. So all humans can see other humans. Why? Because in certain ways, we all tap our organismic awareness, but we don't know it. God does not let us see that. You see it. He does not let us see that. And the question is, why not? That's a different question. He doesn't let us see it. But the way we do it, metaphysically, the way we can see another person is because that person is me. And this is the astonishing concept. The only way you can see something outside of you is if that being outside of you is you through an organism. If that being relates to you as part of your organism and you are both part of the same organism, then you can suddenly know it. So therefore, the only way we could know anything, and this is the rule, the only way we could know anything is by knowing ourself, right? Ourself. Awareness does not extend to anything outside of ourself. We cannot know anything outside of ourself. But if it's ourself or part of ourself, it's ourself because I can say the word me, or it's part of ourself because I and that other entity are part of an organism, then I can suddenly see it and know it. Because it's part of me. It's not a stranger. So therefore, we see a fantastic principle that the only way you can know anything outside of yourself is if that thing which is outside of you is you. It's part of you. But what part? Is it you? No, it's part of you. It's an organismic entity that shares you and everything else as part of the organism. It's called organismic awareness. So we see the fundamental principle that the knowledge of anything outside of self is not possible. It's only possible if I know that thing outside of me happens to also be part of me. That's right. So therefore, ultimately, my ability to know the human race, all other people, is really because everyone is really part of me. It's an organism. So we see a fundamental concept, and this is the terrible thing that's on. God has hidden that knowledge so that humans that see other humans, that are aware of other humans, are not using the concept of self-awareness. They know other humans because other humans are already part of them. That's right. As a human being, you see, I'm an American and so on. But the way I know an African is that I am part of the African. He is part of the organismic entity called humanity. Or the way I know an Asian. Or the way I know anyone. The reason when I go to Mongolia, which by the way I've been, when I go to Mongolia and I see a Mongolian, which I have nothing to do with, he is an absolute stranger, it's because that Mongolian is part of my organism. That's right. In a certain way, which I don't understand, he is another organ in the system called humanity. Humanity is an organism. That's right. All humanity, every single individual that has ever been born from Adam himself down is part of the organism called humanity. In fact, we know this definitely. Why? Because it says in the Kabbalah, it says that originally Adam, the first man, Adam Rishon, before the sin, was one body. Every soul of all humanity, from the beginning of time to the end of time, is really fused into one soul that was called Adam. That single person at the beginning of creation, called Adam Rishon, Adam, was once everybody. Every soul that ever existed was once fused into one soul. And because of the sin, God fragmented him. So suddenly Adam became a billion people. That's right. A billion pieces of Adam became a billion pieces. But fundamentally, all these pieces, which were once one, was an organism, of course. But it was more than an organism. It was actually unified. It was a single entity, fused together. Wow. So now that it's fragmented, the organism hasn't died. God did not fragment it so that it completely separated. That every human being that ever lived and ever will live is still part of that Adam. Adam, the first man whose soul was fragmented into the human race, still lives. That's right, but no longer as a single consciousness. Now Adam, the first man, who used to be a single consciousness, where every self was part of the same entity, is now fragmented into billions of pieces. But those billions of pieces are still one entity in a sense. It is no longer fused into one entity with one consciousness, who's called the Adam Rishon, but he is now fused as an organism. We are all still an organism because we were once together and we are still together. At least in the sense of an organism. And how do we know that? Because if that weren't true, we would not be able to even know each other, because awareness only extends to self. It only extends to the awareness of self. It cannot transcend that. It cannot go to another. It's called self-awareness, and all that exists is self-awareness. So then how can I know something else? Because that something else is part of me. It's part of my organism, and therefore it is not a stranger. That's the only way I can know another person. Because that other person is me. It's me as an organismic consciousness. This is an extremely powerful concept. And this affects the idea of what? Of achdus. One of the things that the Torah is necessarily concerned with is achdus, unity. God says to every Jew, every Jew is a guarantor for another Jew. In other words, if you see and you know a person is Jewish, or even a person is human, but I'm only talking about Jews, you have to help him. You have to help him, in different ways. If he's in trouble and so on, you have to try and help him if you can. That's what it said. Kol Yisrael HaReivim Zeh Lezeh. Every Jew is connected to every other Jew. Well, what is God talking about? If I see someone walking down the block, right? Do I know he's Jewish? No, I don't know. I've never seen this person in my life. But yet God says, as soon as you find out that he's Jewish, or even as soon as you see another human being also, but that's an extended organism, but at least if you know that he's Jewish, you suddenly become obligated to help him and save him in any way that you can. And that's what it means, thou shalt not stand idly by on thy brother's blood. If he's in danger, you have an obligation to save him, if you can. Why? If I don't know that he's Jewish, I don't even know who he is, why do I have to save him? Because he is you. Why? Because all humans, every one of them, especially the Jews are a suborganism. That's right. They are an organism within an organism, because they have a somewhat slightly different spiritual destiny. But in that unique spiritual destiny that all Jews share, he is part of that organism, which is a suborganism of the organism of the human race. And that's what God says. You don't know who you are, God says, when God speaks to us. You think that you are all separate entities, that you exist. How? By existence, the process called existence. And therefore you are a multiple entity. That's not you don't exist that way. You exist by the process of awareness. And the process of awareness extends from self, and it's limited to self. It cannot go beyond self. And the only reason why you can know another person, another Jew, is because he is you as an organism. So the knowledge of other comes from the knowledge of me, an organismic consciousness. So God says, I have separated you in a certain sense, and I have given you all the belief that you are strangers. Why? Why have I done this? That's the question that we have to ask. Why has God taken away the power of consciousness to truly understand total me? Not only this me as a self, the word me, but the other self, that he is also part of me as an organism. Why has God taken away this knowledge? Because fundamentally, we all have a problem in unity. We think that things are separated. For example, when I see God, I think that he's a you. I look at myself and I say me, and I say to God, you. But God is not a you. Because God, you are part of God. There's nothing outside of him. So you are part of him. So therefore, when God sees you, he says to you, I am you. I'm not outside of you. I'm not a you. I am you. I'm part of the me. I'm what's called the inner me. That there's something called me when I think of me, but there's an inner me. That's me. That's God. Because I am the foundation of your self-awareness. You participate in self-awareness because you have a piece of my self-awareness. That's my gift to you as a human being. That's what makes you godly. That you are derived to my self-awareness in a certain way. And that's what makes you godly. And I will never confiscate that from you if you deserve to have me as part of you. That's the way it is. But I have taken away that knowledge. Why? Because self-awareness not only gives you knowledge of you, but self-awareness in a certain sense gives the knowledge of me, but with the knowledge of me comes the knowledge of not me, something outside. So therefore, you refer to me, God, as a you. But you cannot do that in the future world, because in the future world, it's a world only with truth. It's the Olam Emes. And therefore, if you refer to me as a you, you are saying something which is not true. Because I am not a you. I am part of your me. That's right. So if you think that I'm a you, you will be thinking a false thought. And therefore, you cannot exist in the future world as a truly spiritual being. You have to get rid of that. You have to choose. How? By loving me. When you love someone, you see them not as outside of you, but you see them as part of you. You can like someone and so on, but you cannot love. True love is when you feel that the other person is not even outside of you. He is a part of you. In some way you feel that I know him and I know him as part of me. That's what love does. So God says, when you love me, which is the highest commandment of all, and you achieve that through the commandments, that love, then suddenly you become part of me, God says. And you no longer refer to me as a you. You will no longer say to me, blessed are you, O Lord. But you will say, blessed are you, but you will say, blessed is the Lord, who is really my enemy. The blessing changes entirely. And that has to change in order for you to be in the future world, which is purely emes and spiritual. So God has taken away this knowledge because God wants you to realize that unity. God wants you to know that he is not a you to you. He is an inner me to your me. That's what he wants you to know. So that you can go to Olam Haba, and that's called Nam Sufa. That the person has Nam Sufa, which means he believes you're a you. That's called Nam Sufa. He does not appreciate the unity between that being and you. He sees yourself as a me, and you see this being as a you, and that's false. And he wants the person to obtain the knowledge of God as an inner me. And not that problem of Namlik Sufa with the disempowerment of the self. The self is disempowered when it sees God as a you. And it's re-empowered when it sees God as an inner me because you love him. That same problem exists with another human being. When you look at another human being, you say the word you, me, you. But another person is not really a you. The other person is an alternative me. So therefore, there's a new pronoun. That's right. The first pronoun is me. That refers to you. The other pronoun is you, something outside of you, which really doesn't exist. But there's another pronoun which takes the place of you. You know what that is? It's not me. It's the word us. U-S. Us. Us means you and me. We are really one entity. We are an organism. The word us applies to an organism. The word me applies to me. The word you applies to something outside of me and completely separate from me, which cannot be grasped through awareness. And then there's the word us. If you and me are part of an organism, the pronoun us applies to us. And us is an organismic consciousness. So God says, I have taken away that knowledge of organism because you have to earn that knowledge. You have to look at another person and realize he is part of you. And so therefore you have to love him. You have to love him if he's Jewish because he's a suborganism. But even if he's a human being, you have to love him because he as a human being is your brother. Even if he's not Jewish. And I am not talking about anti-Semites, because what an anti-Semite does is he fractures the word us. He says, I hate the Jew. The Jew is not part of me. I'm a separate person. And if I have to destroy the Jew, well, that's a person who has what? Who has destroyed the unity between him and the Jew. And he's destroyed the word us. And therefore, that person would not live in Olam Haba. Every person who is an anti-Semite and hates a Jew and does things to destroy Jews will not exist beyond life and death. Why? Because he cannot exist. He has destroyed the organism of an us. So I am talking about all humans who are not anti-Semites. They may not be Jewish. They may be Goyim, okay, but they're still human, and therefore they still exist on an organismic level with Jews, the total organism. So there's an us that refers to humanity, an organism consciousness that refers to all humanity together, and there's a sub-us that refers to the Jewish people. Yes, there are different levels of us, but on all levels of us live in an achdus. There's a certain intrinsic unity which enables us to even see each other. You see, so therefore, the request of God to be unified and to take care of all humans, to do chesed for all humans, is not simply a suggestion. God is not saying, well, I feel better, I'm your father. No, it's not because God is our father. He is our father, but that's not the reason. What I'm saying now is completely different. God says to us, you will have to love each other in a certain way. Why? Not only because I am your father and I want that. Why? Because without you becoming one, without you being an organism and accessing the total me, your total consciousness where you can feel that everyone is part of your organism. Therefore, you will not be able to even see another person. That's right. You can't even be aware, because awareness only applies to the self. It gives the self-knowledge that it is. It doesn't give the knowledge to anything else. The only way you can know that something else is if you know that as an organism, part of your organism. Then your awareness extends outward, because the organism is an extension of me. The same way you know yourself exists is the same way you know that the organism exists. It's an extension of me. It's a higher level of consciousness. And God will restore that, but he wants you to earn that. Just like he wants you to earn the knowledge that you and God are really part of the same being. God is your enemy. God wants you to have that same knowledge with all human beings. He wants you to know that the totality of your consciousness, the word us, applies not only to you, it applies to all people. Why? Not because he's only your father. Much more than that. Because if that were not true, you could not be aware of someone else. Because awareness does not convey being to something outside of you alone. It's only if it relates to your being of me that you suddenly become aware of it as an extended form of consciousness. So what I'm saying is a very deep truth, a tremendous truth about the Achdus. Why God says that you have to love all men, and Jews have to love each other especially, in a certain sense. Why? Because all of you are an organism. Jews are all an organism and a sub-organism, but Jews are also an organism with Goyim, non-Jews. You are all an organism. And if you weren't an organism, you would not have the common consciousness that an organism has, that it's part and parcel of everything else, when no one is a stranger. You wouldn't even know that another entity exists. That's why you must take care of each other and love each other. It's in the very existence of who you are. You think that I saying you have to love each other because I'm your father. Well, I'm out of your existence in a certain way. But I'm saying to you, no, the love for you have to have for each other, for Jews and for good goyim in each other, is because that is the way you exist. Because awareness is limited. Awareness is limited to the knowledge of self. And unless you realize that all humanity is part of self in a certain way, as an organism, you will not even know that there's something else. And this is a shock. This is Achdus. The knowledge that someone else exists comes from a total awareness that I exist. When I know that I exist totally, by the word me and by the word organism, then I know that everyone else exists from that awareness, the awareness of self and the extended awareness of the organism. That's how I become aware of existence. That's how I obtain knowledge. Only by knowing who I am and who I'm connected to as an organism do I know who else is outside of me, fictitiously, but they're not really outside of me. Because we were all once part of Adam Rishon. We had the consciousness of one being fragmented into the human race. But we are still, if we are not one person anymore, we are still an organism, and a suborganism, and a suborganism. But we relate to each other as an organism. We have no choice. We cannot get away from it. Why? Because beyond awareness only can extend to the self. And you can only be aware of me or extended me. Outside of the word me, if you think that someone else is a you cannot even be aware of him. So that's what you have to work on. You have to work on the problem of you. You is the biggest problem. You when it's applied to God, because God is not a you, and you when it's applied to another human being, because he's not a you. He's part of your me. On some level, he's part of the me like God is, or he's part of the extended me as an organism. But this is the truth of humanity. And humanity does not understand this. Humanity has done tremendous evil. The greatest pain in all of human history is continuously that humanity is always at war. They are always stealing from each other. They are always interested in power over each other. So therefore, power, theft, and murder are extensions of what? They're not extensions of an organism, because an organism does not behave that way. But they are extensions of the word you. When humanity sees another person as a you, he's off the charts. There is no unity anymore. And this is something that someday this knowledge will return to mankind. When? When the Mashiach comes. This is the greatest knowledge that the Mashiach will finally give to mankind. He would say to mankind, why are you killing each other? Why are you stealing from each other? You know what? Don't you know your relationship? Don't you all know who you are to each other? Do you think an African, a black African, is different in his relationship to you as a white person, or as an Asian person, or a Latino person, or anything? Don't you realize the concept that humanity is an organism as a whole? You have to stop it. And I will restore, with the power of God, this knowledge to all of men. And there will come a time when humanity will absorb this concept in which I'm saying, that the unity of humanity is equivalent to the concept of self, the concept of me. But it's not just me, it's total me. When you will finally understand that your total me means the unity between you and the entire human race throughout all of history, and the tremendous evil that men have done to each other by disregarding this fundamental fact. And that's the Messianic period. And that is really what? The true destiny of man. The true destiny of the human race as a race composed of separate people is their destiny will finally someday reflect itself as an organism. Every man on earth will become part of that organism. And we will suddenly have a respect and a love for everyone, not those who are anti-Semites, not those who are murderers, and so on and so forth. All of these people will pay for their duplicity. God will punish seriously all those people who what? Who thought they were getting away with power, thought they were getting away with theft, thought they were getting away with murder. Because those people have removed themselves from the organismic me to become separate entities. And by excluding themselves as separate entities from humanity, they will all suffer. And I don't even want to say what that suffering will be. And humanity has to understand this. So the message that I'm saying now is critical. This year tells you what I believe is the most fundamental truth that humanity has to learn about itself. That there is no awareness beyond me. Awareness cannot go beyond self. So therefore, it can extend to self and it can extend to organismic self, because those are both parts of me. And that can only be done through love, through nothing else. And that's what God is waiting for. He is waiting finally when mankind loves each other and is there for each other. Thou shalt not stand by thy brother's blood. And this is the fundamental knowledge, the fundamental truth that mankind has avoided. This truth has never been said before in terms of what? In terms of anyone saying it. Philosophers, scientists, all of them have no idea of what I am talking about. But someday every one of them will. That the human race is an organism. It's an extended me. And it deserves respect and love like an organism does, just like your body. Your body, if it could talk to you, would tell you the truth. It would tell you what you have to know. That every organ in this body, every cell in this body is a brother and a sister to every other cell in this body. And that's the only truth. So that if you put in another organ from someone else, we don't want it. It's not mine. And that is the truth of humanity as a whole. The truth of the human body as an organism is really the truth of humanity as an organism, and the Jewish people as a suborganism, which they have never been able to capture. They don't seem to be able to comprehend this fundamental truth, that this is what God is saying. I want you to love each other, not because I'm your father, although that would be sufficient in a way. You have to love each other because that's you. That's the only way you can ever be aware of each other. You have to be aware of the pronoun us. There's no such thing as the pronoun you. That's a fiction because of Nam Sufa. And someday that fiction will be removed. So there will only be what? Two types of awareness in the future in Olam Haba. What's that? The awareness of me, which is self-awareness, and the awareness of us as the total organismic awareness. Someday we'll be all aware of each other as part of an organism in Olam Haba. And this will be the only thing that will really exist. Mankind will finally learn this lesson. Why? Only because God, and even though we are reaching a point where there's a tremendous amount of you in the world, self-division, but God will restore mankind. Why? Because God loves mankind. In a certain way, mankind is like a mirror image of God. It's not really God. It doesn't have the profound unity that God has, where there is no reality outside of him, but it has a profound unity that comes from God. And God would not tolerate something that he derived from himself that did not have this unity, period. So therefore, this shiur has to be listened to over and over again and spread. Every person has to become a messenger of what this shiur is about, of what I am saying. That the unity of mankind is based on the fact that they're all brothers. And without that, they could not even be aware of each other, because it's only by recognizing the awareness of me can I recognize the awareness of someone else as what? As part of me, as part of the group of us. Okay, that's it. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. The awareness, the theory that you're putting forth about being part of an organism, and that's all humankind has, therefore, because we're all part of that organism, can now be aware of each other. What about inanimate objects and animal life, the sun, moon, all that? Do you have awareness
Very good.
of that? Are they part?
Okay, very good question. You're asking a very good question. What about other entities that are not humans? Very good. That I'm going to speak about in the next shiur. That is a whole shiur. Where does the awareness of everything else come from? The awareness of animals, plants, objects, angels. Where does the awareness of all of this come from? Since they are not part of the real organism of mankind, That is an excellent question. But that itself is a share itself. So that's what I'm going to concentrate next time. Thank you for asking the question.
Welcome.
So, Reb Shimon, could you clarify, how does failure to achieve this organismic consciousness lead to ibud?
Well, because it removes the person from us. It when he fails to achieve it because he is evil to another person, so he places himself outside of us, and that's similar to cancer. You know what cancer is? Cancer is when the cells, there's something called an infectious disease, and what that means, that's a disease where alien bacteria or virus attack the body or fungus attack the body. Those are the enemies from the outside. But cancer is an infliction of a disease on the body itself. What disease? Because what happens is that cancer cells were once part of the human body. They were part of the organismic structure. But somehow, in some way, they suddenly see themselves as outside of the body. They are like independent, separate cells, and they begin to attack the body, and they begin to rob the body of its nutrition and everything about it. So the person dies. Cancer is the example of when people are evil to each other. In other words, they place themselves outside of the organismic entity of humanity. And what does that risk? Well, if they don't get their act together, they will not be part of humanity. God will confiscate their reality, and suddenly they will be annihilated. They don't realize every one of them that divides mankind or is unfaithful or ungiving, every person that can look at another person with an evil eye doesn't realize that he is at risk of being part of the organism, and therefore what's at risk is his existence. He will go out of existence as being no longer part of the me. Now, is it true he'll go out of existence? Well, I don't know, but God will judge him on that basis to see how evil was he. He killed somebody? Did he extend power? Was he a thief? Or what did he do? What kind of evil did he did? That's the way God will judge the human race. Basically, not only how they relate to him as a you, but how they relate to each other as a you. And this is a terrible thought of the ultimate destiny of evil people. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much for listening. And
thank you.
I'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
Okay. Perfect. Sorry, Shimon.
Very powerful, Reb Shimon. Powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Reb Shimon, would you be upset if I say your source for this?
Okay. What's the source for this?
He's an Adi B'Marim Ramchal, when he discusses the Chushim, and he discusses how a person can see something. How do you see? And he says you can never see something that's not really you. And
he says that?
He says that. Yeah, you have to see it inside. It's crazy. You don't know what he means.
Wow.
You have to share. Yeah, but he says he answers Avi's question and other human beings. And he says everything is really nishrash in the neshama itself. Everything really has a root in the person's neshama, because the person's neshama comes from God, and everything is rooted in God. So if he's a piece of God, everything is really rooted in him. The only way it's possible. This is what he says. This is Ramchal. He says the only way it's possible for the Chish Hariyah to operate is the neshama connects to the source of that thing that it's looking at in itself. And what you see is you see a vision of that thing in the shoyish, how it's connected to your neshama. Some crazy Torah like that.
But now you understand it from what I'm saying, because of the nature of awareness. Very good. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah. These are the words. I'll read a line. He says, "Ve'inyan hu ki ein יש דבר בכל הבריאה שאין חלק בנשמה כנגדה. וצורך שיהיה קשר בין חלקי הנשמה לבריאה. Right? He says, וזה, כי הנשמה הוא רואה הדברים outside of it, ומצטיירים הדברים בעצמה, כי בהשכלה על דבר אחד, right? הנה הדבר הוא ודאי נשאר בו בנשמה, כמו שכתבנו. And then he goes in and he says, anything that you see, רק שעד שלא יראה סוי, you didn't get to the root of it in its own neshama. כשיראה סוי, אז מצטייר בו הצורה היא ממש, and that's how you find that other thing, how it connects to you, and that's how you're able to see it. כי כל הפרוטים הם חלקי הכלל, ונשמה מושרש הכל. Everything is mushish in the neshama, and he goes into saying because everything is mushish from God, and the neshama is a piece of God. So everything, the whole bria is really mushish in each person's soul.
So what I have done is I've extended the explanation in terms of awareness. That the Ramchal is saying that's piece of neshama, but I'm saying more than that. It has to do with the way you know you exist. You know,
you're giving a whole oimik to this piece.
Right, of course.
You're giving a whole oimik to this piece. Exactly.
Yes. Wow. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Asi Bamorim, when he discusses Eina the Orach. Yeah, when he discusses the eyes of Ak. And yeah, he says crazy stuff. And this is where he goes in. He has 20 pages on the Shimon.
Okay, you'll tell me where it is in Adar Bamorim.
Yeah, Adar Bamorim by Eina the Orach.
Now this, you should know, this is the tachlis of the Jewish people. They have to bring this message to mankind. That's what the Mamlechus Kohanim is. The Goy Kodesh is the awareness of a Jew about this reality. But the Mamlechus Kohanim says this: when the Jew starts to relate to every other Jew in the context of which I described, that is the message that God wants the Jew to give to mankind itself. And that's what it means. In you will be the blessing, because I have commanded you to love each other. And when all the Goyim see that you exhibit this, you not only say it, but you exhibit the commandment because you try and behave that way. That is your shlichus. And that will bring the messianic power. That's the Mashiach. When you bring the Moshe Mashiach, finally that idea that everything is organismic, everything is part of an us, will be known to mankind, and then mankind will stop its evil. But because you have failed to bring it to mankind, you Jews have failed to behave in the way of what the ultimate truth is, for whatever reason, you have failed your mission on the Mamlechus Kohanim. Therefore, I have put you in Golus. Why does the Banishim say I put you in Golus? Because you have failed in the Mamlechus Kohanim. So therefore, I have put you among the nations of the world in Golus and exile. You see it? For certain reasons. But that's the concept. Very good.
Yeah, they'll be shocked when they see this. See, Ramchal in this piece explains that really we're all capable of seeing the connections, he says, because the eyes and the heart are connected. So that's why you're allowed to be Machal Shabbos if somebody has something with the eyes, because there's a massive connection between the heart and the eyes. He says when tzaddikim have Ruach HaKodesh, they're seeing through the heart, and the heart feels all the connections, and that's Ruach HaKodesh. But the problem with us is that our eyes...
But what I'm saying, they see it through the awareness, and that's the brain. The brain is what provides
the heart and the brain, yeah.
It's the brain.
It says that
but it's really...
The physical eye is a filter and it blocks us to see those connections. And that's why we see everything as separate.
But the key word, and I don't want to deviate from what I said, key is an awareness. If you understand what awareness is, that awareness is the self-knowledge of your existence, then you will understand it's limited only to the me. Anything which is part of the me, you're aware of. If it's not part of the me, you're outside of the us, you're outside of the organism, and you cannot be detected. That's the power of awareness, and that comes from the brain. Of course, as it's modified by the heart, however you want to say it, but it's the awareness itself, the phenomenon, the event called awareness, and its limitation to the me and to the us that does that. Thank you. Okay. Are we still on record?
Yeah, I think.
Hello?
Yeah. Still recording.
We're still recording. Okay. So I'm going to get off. But this is a very powerful lecture.
Amazing.
And start to tell this to people the way I'm saying it.
Yes, when the Mashiach will teach this to the world, Reb Shimon, the world will be in a nuclear explosion of knowledge. The world will be shocked.
We ourselves can be part of the beginning of that awareness. That's it. Mm-hmm. And God will see to it that this awareness becomes part of the world.
Amen.
Now that you know this, you can start to say this. I don't know how many people can understand it, because it's somewhat difficult, but I've given a very clear explanation of this. So this needs to be part of the recording. It should be part of YouTube. Okay?
Yeah.
It's very important that you do. And this should be listened to. This share should be listened to by millions of people all over the earth.
Amen. What should be the title?
Yeah.
The ultimate unity of mankind.
Mm.
Amazing.
Okay, thank you.